IAS, and before I turn the program over to Richard Meyer, I want to just make a few announcements. And the first is to remind us that we are sitting right now on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of indigenous people. The university resides on Dakota land that was ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. And the IAS acknowledges that this is a very layered and complex history, and this land acknowledgement is one way in which we try to educate the community about our relationships to the land and to each other. The IAS is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. We have a few upcoming deadlines. Residential faculty fellowships are due on Monday, November 11th. We have opened a new round of 5x5, 5 people, 5 meetings. Applications, this cycle will be due, it's a rolling deadline, but we'll close this cycle on December 20th. And then next week, we will be upstairs in Best Buy Theater, and it's one of our themed series on environmental justice for the year, along with Northrop and the University Honors Program. And it will be a conversation between Aviva Ramani, who's an ecological artist, and Catherine Milan, who's a sociologist from the UMD campus. So next week, same time, but upstairs in Best Buy Theater. And so it's my great, and you know what, I'm going to go back to that because the light is better for the blind. It's my great pleasure to introduce Richard Meyer. He's, a lamp. How cool is that? I like when you have guests who know your system. He's the Robert and Ruth Halperin Professor in Art History at Stanford University, where he teaches courses on 20th century American art, photography, and gender and sexuality studies. He's also interested in curatorial practices and has served as guest curator of exhibitions including Warhol's Jews, 10 Portraits Reconsidered at the Jewish Museum in New York and the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, and Naked Hollywood, Ouija in Los Angeles at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. I love the title of that exhibit. Meyer's first book, Outlaw Representation, Censorship and Homosexuality in 20th Century American Art, was awarded the Charles C. Eldridge Prize for Outstanding Scholarship from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. He's also the author of What Was Contemporary Art and co-author with Catherine Lord of Art and Queer Culture, a revised edition and updated edition of which was published in 2019 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. He's currently writing Master of the Two Left Feet, Morris Hirshfield, Rediscovered, a related exhibition of which will open in October 2021 at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice. So I want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Weissman Art Museum and the Departments of Art and Art History, and welcome Richard Meyer.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'm just setting my timer, so I loathe people who don't stop talking when they're supposed to. Thank you for the invitation to speak. That is from both the Institute of Advanced Study and also specifically from Jen Marshall, who's working on a really exciting book on William Edmondson, a self-taught artist, that I think of as kind of, I guess maybe secretly, but now I'm revealing as a kind of companion to my book project, which is, I actually haven't decided, this is a question that, I haven't decided whether to call it Master of the Two Left Feet or The Master of the Two Left Feet. So you don't have to answer now, but think about the. And this is an excerpt. I decided actually to use this occasion to write some of the book that I have to finish eventually next year. And so this is a section on the way in which the Surrealists claimed the artist, but it also gives you a larger framing. And there's a part that's on the challenges I'm facing in curating the show, the retrospective, that will open at the Peggy Guggenheim in 2 years. Okay, so I'm gonna start. In a modest brick house way out in what Manhattanites like to call the wilds of Brooklyn, the Bensonhurst section, lives a little old man named Morris Hirshfield. He has a youthful face, a figure bent beyond his years, a thick Russian accent, and a chuckle, heh, 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 that's in the original quote, like a character in a fairy tale. Last week, this old man, an untaught artist who began painting just 6 years ago, received one of the highest honors that can be accorded a contemporary painter, a one-man retrospective at the elegant, sophisticated, and air-conditioned Museum of Modern Art in the center of Manhattan. End quote. I know I didn't tell you it was a quote because I kind of wanted there to be a little bit of drama. In July 1943, so that's why they have the air conditioned, it's July 1943. This is how Newsweek magazine introduced the heretofore little-known Morris Hirshfield to a national audience. In doing so, the magazine narrated a fable of a little old man with a stoop and an imperfect command of English who lived in a remote and uncivilized outer borough location, way out in the wilds of Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn, by the way. The word Jewish is never mentioned by Newsweek, though the descriptive vocabulary employed to describe the artist would have suggested as much to period readers. Thick Russian accent and little old man would have done the trick, but particularly because Brooklyn was the home of more Jewish New Yorkers than any other borough in the city and had one of the largest Jewish populations on its own in Brooklyn in the world. The title of Newsweek's article, Naive Lion, only makes sense after one looks at the article's illustration and caption. Quote, Morris Hirshfield draws nudes that look like a 1910 dress form and paints a quizzical lion that looks like Morris Hirshfield. I myself do not find the resemblance between, oh, this is the painting, which is an incredible painting. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I myself do not find the resemblance between Morris Hirshfield and the face of the lion he painted in 1940 particularly persuasive, though I will admit that their white mustaches and frontal stares have something in common. I would nominate Bert Lahr's Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz, released in 1939, as a closer cousin to Hirshfield's creature. Newsweek's purpose in likening the artist, I'll just go back to this for a second, to the animal he pictures is not only to personify the painted lion, but also, and more crucially, to primitivize the artist. Naive Lion not only describes the painting, but also the painter. And here I just want to show you how the trees and bushes and plants in Hirshfield's paintings of animals, in this one in particular, are miniaturized yet precisely manicured. And this is not the best slide. It's very difficult, anyway, to capture in reproduction, but there are thousands, literally thousands, of individually applied brushstrokes, not only for the grass, but also, I don't know what to call these. I mean, they're leaves, they're palm fronds, but then it looks like that's some kind of bush or tree, but they're completely, I mean, it becomes this micro world on its own. Something that even, Hirshfield never wanted his animals to disturb the imaginary landscapes in which they were set. The lion's mane and minuscule feet do not, therefore, trample the surrounding shrubbery. So you can see there's a way in which the shrubbery seems to bend, but not in a contorted or, anyway, extreme way, but there is this kind of fit between the animal and the landscape, even though both are extremely stylized. The creature and his natural setting, a micro world of verdant blades of grass, leaves, and plantings seem to harmonize with each other. Even as he stands gently on that carefully painted ground, Hirshfield's lion also invokes the human world through the expression on his heart-shaped face. He is, I would say, perhaps less king of the jungle than leonine acquaintance, maybe even, but as Sidney Janis, the art collector and later the fabulously successful art dealer who discovered Hirshfield, said shortly after the painting was made in 1939, he said about it that the lion's mane resembles a woman's fur stole that wraps or buttons, as such garments do, right over left. So he's talking about this here, which is kind of a reading that I love. Only Hirshfield would invent a lion who not only has fur, but wears it as well. And here I'm just showing you, because it's about, this is Tiger, which is the companion painting to lion, and it shows you, anyway, more clearly, I think, because there's somewhat more variation, but I'm particularly interested in those birds, which if you were in any way to ask for a relatively naturalistic scale, I mean, those birds are like, you know, they're tiny, I mean, they're tiny, but yet they're also, if that tree, sorry, I'm not being very descriptive, because his paintings sort of flummox my descriptive vocabulary in certain ways. First of all, notice how he fits, how the tiger, again, no trampling, but also these, to be honest, when I first saw a reproduction of this, I don't even know that I really fully appreciated that there were birds in the tree. And here's his signature. So part of what I want to say, I guess, about Hirshfield, there are all these things that people think are wrong with the paintings when they hold the paintings up to a standard of verisimilitude, or let's say Renaissance illusionism. But they're right. There's ways in which they're right for him, for Hirshfield's imaginative vision of the world, which never accorded, and I don't believe he ever intended it to accord with a kind of photographic realism. Okay, so, oh, by the way, I'll just tell you as a little bit of art world or museum gossip. So these are both Lion and Tiger are at the Museum of Modern Art. So of course, and they're almost always in storage, although recently, I don't take credit for this, but I don't think it was completely unrelated that when the Museum of Modern Art rehung their collection, they had 3 Hirshfield on display literally for the first time since the 1940s. But the curator said to me, we're borrowing 6 of their 8 Hirshfields, and the artist only made 70 paintings. I'll explain why there were so relatively few. But they said, you can't have both of the animals. For no particular reason, she was like, choose. You have to have either the lion or the tiger. And I had chosen the lion because I love the thing about them. And then I was like, no, I really need the tiger. So I said, can I get the lion and give you back the tiger? And they said yes. So if you come to Venice in October 2021, you could see lion. Tiger. Okay. So now I'm going to introduce the artist in a way quite different from Newsweek. Born into a poor Jewish family in provincial Poland, Moishe Hirshfield emigrated at the age of 18 to New York City. His family was part of a large wave of Ashkenazi immigration in the 1880s and 90s among Jews seeking to escape pogroms and other forms of anti-Jewish violence and oppression. In America, and I don't know how quickly, but it may even have been at Ellis Island, but in America, Moishe changed his first name to Morris and found a job as a pattern cutter in a dress factory on the Lower East Side. For the next 45 years, he worked his way up through the trade, ultimately becoming the owner of the EZ, so it's the letters E and Z, Walk Manufacturing Company, one of the leading makers of boudoir slippers in the nation. In addition to selling slippers, Hirshfield invented arch supports, ankle straighteners, and other devices that today would be called orthopedic. Over the course of 2 decades, he was granted 24 patents from the US government. Calling himself a foot appliance specialist, or a foot appliance consultant, foot appliance consultant, I have to change that in my text. Hirshfield was, in effect, a Brooklyn version of Dr. William Scholl, the Chicago podiatrist whose brand of foot care products, Dr. Scholl's, became world famous. Forced to retire from I just wanted to show you, this is an ad for the different arch supports, all of which were invented by Hirshfield. These were sold to the trade. So if you were a store, you bought these and then sold them. They were not retailed by Easy Walk. I love that it's easy. Anyway, I don't know why, I just love that. And notice, and I'll return to this, it's on West 14th Street in Manhattan. And he was commuting every day for 20 years to Manhattan. But these are important because it says arch supports that sell, and so instead of saying buy these arch supports, I mean they do want them to buy them, but they're promoting them as things that will sell in their store. But they're also just incredible, I think, patents from 1913 to 1931 that that were issued by the U.S. government, by the government. For this is an arch support and ankle straightener. It's combined, which so that anyway it did both things. Don't ask me. I mean, I actually hired someone, like a student who's in design and knows about engineering, to explain these to me because I don't have that training. But and also this is a shoe with an adjustable arch construction, which means you can actually move the arch, or if you have fallen arches, I think it was as they get better, then you can change it, or maybe it's that the store. I don't remember. I'm sorry, but these are 2 of the patents. Now I don't know. As you see, it says inventor Morris Hirshfield, and then there's an attorney. One of the things I used to claim in my talks is like, look, later they said he didn't know how to draw, but look at these diagrams. And I was then told, well, there were probably technical draftsmen who made these. But I will say what he did know, because he had invented it, and there are extremely long descriptions that go with in writing that say exactly what each figure is. I mean, I still couldn't understand them, but and those are by him. So if he didn't draw these, they are drawn to his specifications. So this idea that he did not understand the human body, which is one of the claims that was made, particularly the foot, is just patently wrong if you happen to look at or become acquainted with his earlier life before he becomes an artist. Okay, so, forced to retire from Easy Walk due to health issues at the age of 65, Hirshfield began painting. Though he had longed to make art, he had no formal training, nor supposedly any knowledge of art history. This claim that he has no knowledge of art history is repeated again and again, even after he's been shown Mondrian's, he's been shown Rousseau's. Somehow there is still this claim. Okay, someone's just going to have to tell me if I go too long because anyway, so that's something that I think is, I mean, this is in a way a different issue with Jen's artist, William Edmondson, but there's a way in which these artists need to continue to be primitivized even after they are discovered. Even after it's clear, well, in my case, because he was taken to Sidney Janis's apartment, and we had all these anecdotes about how he didn't like Mondrian, and he didn't like Rousseau. I mean, this notion that there's no art historical knowledge simply doesn't make sense. But even after this artist is discovered, the narrative never changes. That he's this well, you heard Newsweek, this sort of character, an old man out of a fairy tale with a bent back, a crooked posture and a Russian accent. who just doesn't say much more than against all odds, his wildly stylized paintings of animals, landscapes, and often nude female figures attracted international renown during his brief career in the 1940s. Admired by Picasso, Mondrian, and Duchamp, among other members of the international avant-garde, Hirshfield's work was purchased in 1941 by Peggy Guggenheim for display in her townhouse and later the Art of this Century gallery. In 1942, the artist was included in First Papers of Surrealism, the most important international exhibition of surrealism in America to that date. And most astoundingly, he was given a one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art in 1943, a show widely criticized by the popular press, and one that contributed to the firing of Alfred Barr, the museum's founding director, a few months later. That's a story that I could talk about more in the Q&A. But I just wanted to show you his first two paintings on which he worked for 2 years. He began them in 37 and wasn't satisfied until 39. He had no canvas. So what he did, much to his wife's chagrin, he took 2 prints off their walls and painted over them without her permission. That face, so this is Beach Girl and Angora Cat. They'll both be in the show, in Venice. But that face, slightly to me Leonardo-esque, or I don't know, some people, anyway, that face is not one that he would have had, the technical ability to paint. However, what he has done, he has added that lipstick, he has added that paint that looks like the image is in sort of ruins, or there's a kind of patination, a sort of oxidation or something. He added that straw-like hair, everything other than the face, all of this. It's called Beach Girl, so I think we're supposed to meant to understand this as sand, and maybe that yarn-like blue is the sky, and you can't completely translate it, but because you just can't. But I just want to show you this detail, because what I think is so important, this is part of her shirt, part of the sand, that is sand, and then part of the, I don't know, rocks or land, or I don't know what it is. But it also looks like maybe, this looks like perhaps wool, maybe this is, I'm forgetting, but another textile. This looks, at least from a distance, like terry cloth. Certainly the white, certainly the sky is yeah, it looks extreme. But one of the things that's amazing, and maybe that artists like Picasso, who was very interested in the materiality of paint, if you just think of Cubist collage, but this was not thickly applied paint. So what looks so textured, it is textured, but it is not deep in the way that it looks. Also, you cannot, if you look at how many brushstrokes there are, each of which is freehand, you can understand why Hirshfield, according to his grandson, worked on his paintings from every day except the Sabbath, from, I don't remember what he said, 8 a.m. to when he went to bed. That is what he did every day, because he loved it. But that's why he finishes his first paintings in 1939. He dies in 1946. So he only has a 7-year career, and he makes 70 paintings, 72. Because of their intensity. Okay, so now the rest of the paper pretty much is going to focus, this is the part I wrote for today, on First Papers of Surrealism. Curated by André Breton, the poet, manifesto writer, and central figure in French Surrealism, First Papers was the most important, I said that already, exhibition, okay. The show is most often remembered for Marcel Duchamp's spectacular decision to thread a mile of string throughout the exhibition, creating a labyrinth of twine that recast the gilded, chandeliered galleries of the Whitelaw Mansion into an oversized play space, and upended the protocols of curatorial exhibition by obstructing rather than enabling visual access and physical proximity to the art on display. Duchamp also invited 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls, to throw balls and play hopscotch in the galleries during the opening night of the exhibition. And one of those boys was Carol Janis, the son of Sidney Janis, who discovered Hirshfield, and Carol Janis told me that because people were getting very annoyed with them, that they were playing ball in the galleries, and he said that Marcel Duchamp told them, if anyone gives you a hard time, you say, Marcel told me to do this. And they did, and then people just let them alone. So here I'm just showing you, this is the Chagall that is on the far, that's the painting on the far wall, just because some of the paintings are so incredible and you wouldn't know exactly what they look like. But I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't have time. So, okay. This is another, a Tanguy. I don't want to keep talking about the exhibition, but I'm very focused on it because of all these problems that are surfacing. But we are going to have a gallery called First Papers of Surrealism, and we're going to have a Tanguy, and we're going to have an Ernst, and we're going to have some of the paintings that were in that show, so that we can reunite Hirshfield with this modernist context, so that he's not only seen, when he's been seen at all in the years since, it's been as a folk artist, which is the wrong term. Self-taught is accurate, but folk is not, for reasons we can discuss. This is the painting that was in First Papers of Surrealism. Although no comprehensive inventory of the show, works in the show exists, we know which painting by Hirshfield was included, since it was among the relatively few pictures selected for reproduction by Breton and Duchamp in the catalog. Duchamp designed the catalog as well as the installation, and probably had a hand in selecting the artists, and Breton curated. Girl with Pigeons presents a clothed female figure reclining, sort of, on a couch. And I say sort of because of this. The woman appears to be a standing figure who has been rotated 90 degrees and then surrounded by a red couch. So there is no sense, other than the fact that the couch is there, that she's actually lying. There is no persuasiveness. And I'm not sure there is meant to be. I think it may be one of the reasons, among others, why this particular painting, which is the only one, I mean, he did many, many female figures, and some, but none of them clothed and prone, and much less on a striped couch. Something that did not fully register until I saw the painting in person is the uncanny living dead effect of the small yellow leaf or droplet that falls from the figure's mouth. So, I don't know what that is. I mean, it also has to do with, anyway, you could see the mouth, the eyes, the yellow droplet. I mean, I've asked various people. One person said to me, which he thought it was her hair, like sweeping, which is clearly not wrong, is wrong, but I thought that was sort of interesting. And someone else said that they thought she was feeding the bird. And anyway, it's not only, it is the yellow in relation to this. If you look at that bird, which is the only vertically oriented bird, she's horizontal when we expect her to be vertical. And the bird is vertical when all the others are horizontal. There's a strange thing going on that I can't, and when I say I can't describe it, I don't necessarily think of that as a failure of my own individual one, so much as a failure of the language we have for grasping what is going on in these paintings, because what's going on is happening inside was happening inside Hirshfield's mind, and I don't think he always was interested in translating it into something that could be fully deciphered by others. Okay, so here is the, rather than including photographs of each artist in the catalog, Breton and Duchamp came up with the idea of what they called compensation portraits, whereby photographs of other figures were identified as though they were portraits of the artist. In this case, the photograph labeled Morris Hirshfield is a portrait of John Muir, the Scottish-born environmentalist and founder of the Sierra Club, taken by Carlton Watkins. The compensation portrait for Duchamp is Ben Shaw's hardscrabble portrait of a photograph of a sharecropper's wife during the Great Depression. Some art historians have commented on the supposed resemblance between Duchamp's face and that of the farm life. So, okay, here's another question for you, because this is also being worked out. In certain ways, I mean, Hirshfield has been a tangent at best to art history. Even though he was very well known in the 40s, he drops into almost complete obscurity, including at MoMA, which has these works, as I've said, they've been in storage until now. And so I don't feel that conventional modes, at least the ones that I know, of doing art history are going to be completely either sufficient or appropriate to understanding this artist. So usually I would feel like, oh, big deal, they chose, you know, John Muir. But in this instance, I've decided to go further with this, and this may be a mistake, but I'm doing it. Where Duchamp's page, so, and obviously this whole thing about the compensation portrait, they said they couldn't get photographs of the artist. Obviously, Marcel Duchamp could get a photograph of himself. And Hirshfield, I mean, there were lots of photographs, or some, that Sidney Janis had taken. So this seems to me, there might have been a few artists who were in Europe but the idea that they couldn't get images of the artist, I mean, Breton, just as the curator has a page, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. However, this compensation portrait, where again, the photographic identification is no longer secure. 9 of the artists in this show were exiles from occupied France. The show is called First Papers of Surrealism because it's a reference to the first papers, which are the documents that you file for citizenship. And you, of course, have to submit a photograph, you know, sort of similar to, I guess, sort of like a passport, what we might photograph. So the fact that they're playing with this, and also playing with it historically, I mean, backdating, this photograph is from 1875, this is from the 30s. I think that there's a kind of play happening both with history and with the security of photographic, photographic truth, but also with the notion, and it's not with that identity can be captured by appearance. So, okay, so I'm not going to say too much, but I will say that yeah, I guess I haven't written this. I see nothing in my paper, so I'll just tell you that I didn't think there was anything I could do with John Muir. Here's this Scottish-born environmentalist in the West. You know, he's helping make sure that, I mean, his work is all about how important nature is. It seemed like nothing to do with this Brooklyn tailor who becomes a sort of novelty item and is then forgotten. But then when I actually started reading John Muir, so I recommend to people, like sometimes it's good to do research, you know. It turns out that his work is full of drawings that are based on either preliminary sketches or photographs that he took in his studies. It is, you know, first person's, treks up these mountains in order to see firsthand. I mean, his work is about encountering firsthand. I mean, here I'm showing you a ram and a sheep. And again, I don't want to push this too hard, but I do think that there is perhaps something to be said. I mean, Morris Hirshfield was no environmentalist, nor was he going out to look at actual lions or rams or sheep. But I think perhaps there's something about the ways in which there's a turnaway. In Morris Hirshfield's work, you never see anything identifiably contemporary. I mean, there was that couch, but the dresses, in other words, there is no reference to Brooklyn. There's no reference to Manhattan. He'd never seen a lion. He'd never been in the jungle, or I don't know, wherever a lion would be. And it's the opposite in that way of, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I'd be interested to hear, talk about it. But I think, in a way, let me just, that maybe that for the surrealists, it actually was partially the animal connection. Even though that's not what was shown, they had shown, although there are birds, obviously it's girl with pigeons. So that's one thing. And I didn't meet Hirshfield's grandson. I'm not going to show it here, but he showed me this book called Our Living World, which had been published by a man of God. What are they called? A preacher, or anyway, in the late 19th century, and it was showing every species. It's 3 volumes, and there's a whole section on birds. There's a section on also animals, but the grandson said that Hirshfield used this book as a way to paint his birds. I have, again, I'm wary of trying to make any one-to-one correspondence, but I think these things matter. For one thing, it shows that Hirshfield did have a visual culture and a literary culture. He wasn't this know-nothing who was just sort of inventing crazy, like his own. I mean, his birds don't look like the birds in that book, but you can see certain things, like the beaks and the stripes, that maybe he borrowed. But what's of interest to me, because there are Hirshfield's markings in the book, is that he was reading and studying that. And so maybe that brings him, anyway, I'm going to stop belaboring this, because I have unlike Duchamp's page, which has just the compensation portrait and the work of art in the show, Hirshfield's page has another work that was not in the show. It's been extremely difficult to find out anything about, but I found out a little. It's by this guy named the Comte de Tromelin, and it's called The Cult of Beauty. It's a drawing from 1905. This man, the only book that I found, it's in French, but about him, which is from the 1930s, describes him this way, the Comte de Tromelin. It was in 1903, at the age of 53, that the Count of Tromelin, a learned mathematician, signed a pact with the spirits and devoted himself entirely to spiritualism. More than 2 years prior, he began to make drawings he considered semi-mediumistic, and it's called in the book, in the catalog, Médium unique. These extremely curious compositions were obtained at night on a table that Tromelin held near his bed for the calculations he made in case of insomnia, the mathematical calculations. He once made, while deprived of light and in a state of half-sleep, a blur, a few notes which, the next day, he sought to recover. To his astonishment, he came to discover lines which he liberated by highlighting them, and which took, through a little training, a turn of satanic, or to the satanic. So here's Tromelin's description. One day, at the bottom of a drawing which I had just finished, I read clearly enough. He read, "Pact between the spirit and Tromelin, by which he pledges to swear them fidelity." I was astonished, and as this writing compelled me to sign an agreement, I made it jokingly, and also because in signing my drawing, it pleased me to subscribe to this pact, and remarked this aloud. Nevertheless, I posed my signature with nervous laughter. So what he's basically saying is, he has this notebook to write down mathematical notations, because when he can't sleep, some of the traces of those notations become the next day a kind of the basis for a kind of automatic. Well, the automatic drawing has already started while he's sleeping, and then he completes it consciously. But he dreams one night, or not dreams, he writes one night a pact out that he has to agree with to do what the spirits tell him. And then when he wakes up, he decides to sign it. So it is this incredible story about these spirits. Here's an artist, so we have a self-taught artist with no training, who's a former tailor in Hirshfield. We have a mathematician with no training in art who thinks he's taking notations for his professional work, and ends up making automatic drawings that he says are urged or forced on him by the spirits, whom he then makes a pact with, that he will follow their instructions, the pact itself being part of the automatic drawing. So anyway, that's the other thing on the page. And then there is a way in which actually I noticed, and again, I don't want to push this too far, but the two women, there are some interesting resonances, I think, between them, not least being maybe, I'm not exactly sure what the woman on the right, you see that there are figures, it looks like with horns and then their ears, I don't know if they're supposed to be satanic. Then there's this sun, and anyway, both of them have a somewhat otherworldly quality, or at least seem to extend far beyond the realm of rational day-to-day life. So, okay, we're almost done. Although I could find no installation shot of the exhibition featuring Girl with Pigeons, I'm showing you a Newsweek magazine photograph of Max Ernst's painting called Surrealism in Painting at the exhibition to summon a sense of how Hirshfield's work would have been similarly displayed or caught within Duchamp's web of string. Shortly before the opening of First Papers of Surrealism, Ernst's painting, at this point Ernst was married to Peggy Guggenheim, was taken down from the wall of the townhouse he shared with his wife, Peggy Chioda. The Chilean surrealist Roberto Mata photographed Ernst, Duchamp, André Breton, and Ernst's former paramour and fellow artist Leonora Carrington near the painting. At some point later in the same day, another painting from Guggenheim's collection, Hirshfield's Nude at the Window, was added to the scene, along with a female mannequin adorned with a sinister mask and one of Peggy's fur coats. The photograph shows us something important about Hirshfield's painting. The likeness of its central figure, not to the body of any living woman, but to the elongated, hairless, and genital-free stand-in for that body, known as a mannequin. And these were, beloved by the surrealists for their uncanny presence, especially when denuded and recostumed with masks, feathers, fur, or fetish gear. Here's the painting. Hirshfield's original title for the painting, Nude at the Window, Hot Night in July, suggests both an explanation for the figure's nakedness, relief from a sultry evening, and alludes to the elevated sexual charge, or heat, that energizes the picture. Okay, when I saw this picture, I didn't realize this talk is really about showing what I saw when I saw these paintings, but when I saw this picture in Germany at a show called The Shadow of the Avant-Garde, I discovered that the nose is three-dimensional. The nose, and only the nose, actually juts out off of the painting. It is made out of putty or something. And there is another painting called Tailor-Made Girl, which I haven't seen yet, which the nose apparently juts out even further. So that is strange. That is a strange practice for a painter in 1942. And I don't really understand it, but I do think it's worth noting, or nosing, sorry. Hirshfield's story, the story of a Brooklyn tailor who became a MoMA artist and was then largely forgotten by history, demands a language different from the academic vocabulary with which I have worked for the last 30 years. The life and work of this popular artist, as he was referred to in the 1940s, deserves to be known by an audience that exceeds academia and the art world. I seek, therefore, to write about him in an accessible and jargon-free style, and to make clear my own place in crafting his story. What is remembered of the past, and what is forgotten? Who is granted a place in history, and who gets written out of it? How does what is forgotten continue to shape our lives in the present moment? These are the questions, at their broadest, that Master of the Two Left Feet hopes to address. Thank you.
So we have plenty of time for questions, and I'll open the floor, and you want to field your own questions?
Yes, please. Okay. Anyway, I'm just leaving on, this is a fantasized mock-up of what the entrance to the show might look like. Yes. So that's a gourd that is obviously, I believe, a large gourd that is obviously phallic. Peggy, so one of the things, this show is going to be at the Peggy Guggenheim collection. The director of the Peggy Guggenheim collection is Peggy Guggenheim's granddaughter, Carol Vale. So working with the Peggy Guggenheim collection has been very interesting. Because it brings into this, and also meeting Hirshfield's grandson and the sons of Sidney Janis, there is these questions about history are also about people who tell their own stories to their own families and are not in accord. But one of the things that is always said about Peggy, she was madly jealous of Leonora Carrington because she believed, which was true, that Ernst was still in love with Leonora Carrington, although Ernst, after he leaves Peggy, he marries another surrealist, female surrealist, not Kay Sage. Anyway, he doesn't marry Leonora Carrington, but theirs is this kind of, they had to leave each other because of the war. So I read this, that is in Peggy's apartment. That is her fur coat on a mannequin with a fetish mask, what I think is a fetish mask. I think of this as a kind of joke, a sexualized joke at Peggy Guggenheim's, what is that called? At your expense, thank you. So, yeah, and I will write about it as such, but yeah. But this is going to be a blow up in the show, this photograph, and this painting will be in the show, which I'm very happy about. And the story will be told, maybe not exactly in that way. I don't think I have to say it's a joke. I'll say it in the book. But over which Carol Vale, the granddaughter, has no say. So where she will over the wall text. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, I think that this for me is really interesting because this is the thing, one thing. Surrealism in painting, the painting Surrealism in Painting by Ernst, it needs no activation to stand as surrealist. Let me just go back to it. This idea that I don't know what the hell that is, but this sort of creature, with multiple heads that is now painting. We know that's surrealist. But what apparently, or maybe, Hirshfield's painting needs to be staged as a tableau vivant. 3 men, all behind the painting, 3 female figures, if you include 2 naked, one with this phallic gourd between her knees. I think that Hirshfield, why I called this self-taught surrealist, I don't think he's not trying to be a surrealist. He's not a member of any avant-garde circle. And also I noticed, was he ever invited to Peggy? It's again like we talked about with Edmondson. So the paintings travel all over, but I don't know, it seems like he just stays in Brooklyn. We know he went to Sidney Janis. No one seems to remember, or no one notes whether he was at his own show at the opening, So again, there is this way in which somehow the paintings can coexist with this level of avant-garde kind of antics, and also with other avant-garde works, but the artist himself, the Brooklyn tailor, cannot. And that seems to me important.
And I'll just say the gourd also is so reminiscent of the figure in Surrealism painting, which is kind of like, look at that, see? It's sort of like it's flipped over.
That's pretty.
Wait, sorry, I have to look. So just
the shape of the gourd and just the shape of the figure in Surrealism and painting. Shapes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially because look how it sort of almost fits in the negative space behind her.
Yeah.
It's funny because this painting was not the one they chose for Surrealism in Paint, for the first papers of Surrealism. But I think, I'm pretty sure, because she buys this painting in 41, and the show is in 42. At first I thought maybe they're returning Surrealism in Painting, but I think actually it's going to go out. I think it's off the wall. And then they decide to, because that's why all these guys are gathered together for the show. And then they decide to do this. I don't know why, but it's very compelling to me. Yes?
Yeah, I'm looking at the subject matter a little bit and thinking, you know, on the reclining woman that's standing at with a standing pose with the pigeons, and the symbology is pigeon is love, you know, and that, you know, I'm thinking of the time frame too. 20 years after, approximately 20 years after, I guess the women were allowed to vote, you know, and so there seems like, you know, he's thinking about what I would imagine. He's thinking about how female are having more self-respect, more pride. However, their image is, you know, symbolically of love, as opposed to, you know, other archetypes.
But I could sort of go with that to some degree in terms of maybe the pigeons that are around the couch, but the pigeon that's with her, there seems to be a strange sort of trance or something like an animal, what is it called, a familiar or something? That I don't want to claim that, but I think the eye of the parrot, there's something very beyond whatever the iconography of a parrot meant. I think it's hard for me to see this image as particularly empowering of women. So this was a question I'll just mention. When the show, at some point, anyway, they pulled out, but it was going to go to Berkeley, the Berkeley Art Museum, and so I presented it to the curators, and then I got these questions that they wanted me to answer, and one of them was like, well, you didn't talk about female objectification, or why is there no, and the thing is that I don't see these exactly as women. I mean, if you look, I see them as mannequin bodies or sort of, it's hard. I mean, if you just look at the way, for example, the chest, sometimes or the clothing, it would sort of be like as though they said, well, what about animal cruelty with the images of the lions? You know, there's no food. It's hard for me to respond, but maybe that's wrong. I mean, I did respond, and I talked about, you know, the misogyny of the surrealists and the problem with using the mannequins, but I didn't fully believe what I was saying. I was just sort of responding because they asked, and I wanted the show to go there. And then they seemed happy enough, but, sorry, I'm looking for this one. And this would be, the nudes are the most suggestive, openly suggestive. You know, and they did no one. So at the time when all these people were being critical of Hirshfield, I said the show was attacked. No one would speak to the erotics or anything. I mean, even in a way that would have been permissible, like, you know, they're perverted, or maybe that wouldn't be the word, but, you know, they're deviant, or they're nothing. No one, and I think, again, I'm not sure that it was unusual, so far as I know, for a self-taught artist, other than Rousseau, to be painting the female nude. That's not what people expected from a so-called folk artist. But the way he does it, it's almost suspended between human and mannequin or something. And then there's things like, if you look at all of these on the curtains, which are like, you know, the breast, like, I mean, the way he does breasts, but then the breasts themselves seem just like just like not really there. So, and then, yeah, there's many things that are eccentric, and what I'm trying to do is retain that eccentricity rather than explain it. And it is the eccentricity. That is why Picasso and Mondrian saw him as a modernist. I mean, they didn't use the word modernist, but why they saw him as a really interesting artist. Because like what they hoped they were doing, it couldn't be made to fit into the formulas of understanding that had already been created. And I feel like it's hard to make it fit now, for me. And but it's also, you don't want to go into a show or read a book and be like, oh, well, the author doesn't know what the hell like to say. I mean, I have things to say, obviously, but yes.
Well, so one question is just sort of, in the way we were talking about earlier, how does Hirshfield come to the attention of these other artists who then interpret him, in essence, as fitting into surrealism? And then the other thing I would just say is, so how did you get so interested in Hirshfield, and what sort of driving the rediscovery?
Well, the first question is easier to answer. Sidney Janis, I mean, there's a story, I won't go into it all right now, but Sidney Janis has a very dramatic story about going into a gallery, and there are these 3 paintings turned against the wall that have been sent to the gallerist. The gallerist is about to send them back to Brooklyn. He thinks they're terrible. And then Sidney Janis, he's guest curating a show called Contemporary Unknown American Artists. And this is a gallery that is selling. So there already is a market so the guy says, well, put Grandma Moses in the show. I think it's Grandma, or maybe it's William Pink. Anyway, he says, put somebody that already has been exhibited. And Sidney Janis says, no, I need unknown. So then he's leaving, and he says, can I turn these around? And he sees Angora Cat, and he says, I was not only looking at the painting was looking at me. The painting somehow recognized, it called out to me. And from that, and then he puts, the very first thing that happens is he puts Morris Hirshfield in that show. And he convinces MoMA that this is an important enough artist. So that's how he gets discovered. There is a last section of this book that I didn't talk about today that is about my family. My grandparents were also, well, they were what's now the Ukraine, actually, but Russian Jewish immigrants from shtetls outside Kiev, and they went into the rag trade. And they lived right near where Hirshfield lived, and my grandmother worked at a dress, sweatshop not far from where he worked. But my point is not that they met or anything like that. So part of it has to do with, I recognized when I was looking at Hirshfield's paintings that on the micro level especially, there was something about beauty that I found there that other people didn't see, and I realized it had to do with seeing my grandmother at work at her sewing machine with all the different fabrics and colors of thread, and also had around her. That was one of my earliest memories, both of beauty and of female power, because she ran the whole household from behind her, from at her sewing machine. She told everyone what to do, and so I think that sometimes the way the book ends, is that I talk about how sometimes art, it's not that my grandmother led me to Morris Hirshfield, it's that Morris Hirshfield led me to something about my grandmother and my own family that I didn't otherwise know. And then the other thing I say, Morris Hirshfield's and Sidney Janowitz is from also a Jewish immigrant family, not first generation. They had owned a shirt company. He had also worked in the shoe business, but in the Janices and in the Hirshfields, it took one generation to go from the rag trade to the art world. And in my family, it took 3. I'm in the art world now. I talk to museum directors. I come here to give a lecture. That's not something my grandmother could have averted. And so I kind of think that this is a story about Jewishness and immigration and the rag trade, but also about aspiration for cultural, cultural recognition or cultural achievement, and I don't, it's a difficult thing because I don't want to overwhelm the book with my story, but I think the ending, it makes sense because I want to tell the story of how I came, and I want people to feel like, your own history matters, whether it's explicit or not, what you're doing. It's something worth thinking about, how you came to this project, how you came to this point in your life. I'm not going to say it like that, obviously. So yeah, I feel like I have a big answer to that. That was a big answer. Yes.
Thanks very much. It was a great talk.
Thanks.
I'm interested because I was just reading this in the New York Times this last week about Bill Traylor.
Uh-huh.
The Dreyfus, what's her name? The actress. Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Her father has this big collection of Bill Traylor. And then in this article, there was sort of getting into the dialogue about what to call these people. And so outsider art
Right.
is no longer considered
was used at the time, among other names.
Well, self-taught doesn't really get you very far.
No.
I mean, in terms of style or in terms of approach or anything, and
Yeah.
naive art, that's also kind of patronizing.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of interested in where he's going to fit in that kind of dialectic.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the reason why I reject folk art is because originally folk art was about artisanal production that was rooted in communities, in a folk, in different, like Pennsylvania Dutch weather vanes or something, and it then becomes attributed to outsider or self-taught artists in a way, and there's a whole production of like folk art history and folk art museums and folk art, I think even journals. And what that does is it takes someone like Hirshfield out of the modernist context. And also, the early years of the Museum of Modern Art, I hope they return to this. I mean, Alfred Barr, in the first permanent collection installation at MoMA in 44 or 5, I don't know. He had self-taught artists in the first room. Before you saw Gauguin, before you saw Seurat, you saw, anyway, you saw Roussel, and you saw maybe Hirshfield, but yes, Hirshfield, because he thought of this as important creative work in its own right, not just as sources for the avant-garde or inspiration, or as a side street, a side road. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with this, which is, with this book and show, is to say, look, this guy matters to modern art, and these issues matter. So I'm less hung up on, what I call him. I do think it's interesting. Alfred Barr, among other people, write in the day about how there's no word that is really, really, what's it called, fully sufficient. I just noticed that in what I read from Newsweek, they used the word untrained, which is, again, I wouldn't use that, but it's an interesting word, because it sort of means, what does self-taught mean? Like, one of the things I want to say is, this guy, he knew how to invent all of these, arches and he knew how to cut text, fabric. He knew how to tailor. That's going into his paintings. So the idea that he's completely unlettered or untaught, it's just that it wasn't in paint, but he was a person who knew how to create things. Yeah, not only use his hands, but also conceive of things, how patterns, how shapes would be reversed, how they, and so forth. So I really want to challenge this idea of being untaught, or, or that the only thing that counts for being self-taught is teaching yourself how to paint. Because I think with everyone, including with the work I do, it's not just based on what I learned in graduate school in art history, it's based on my grandmother in a way, and what I learned from seeing herself. Yes?
My question may seem somewhat tangential, but stimulated in part by your family history, and then the year 1942, the year of the Mata photograph, the year of the first papers exhibition. And I have two kinds of responses to it. On one hand, there's sort of the thought of, oh my God, 1942, half the world is at war, and here are people celebrating art. And then my other reaction, almost the opposite, is, thank God, the world could continue to think about the production of art and the reception of it at a time when huge numbers of U.S. Young men were overseas, and when, of course, Jews began to be, my family, rounded up across much of Europe.
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely important. There's a couple of, first of all, the Surrealists wrote, and Breton wrote a lot about the role of art and of Surrealism, of the unconscious as a response to, the war. But it's also the case that Breton and Ernst were only in the United States because they had to leave. Duchamp had been going back and forth for a while, and that's true of Leonora Carrington too. No, is it not true?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, But the other thing I wanted to say is Hirshfield makes no reference. He's painting from 1939, or he finishes his first painting, to 1946, he dies. I mean, almost exactly the years of the war. There is not one reference, except there's a painting called Patriotic Children. There's also a painting, he does some biblical paintings, but then he does Christmas Tree. And I read Christmas Tree, very weird, it looks nothing like a Christmas tree. But I read it, and I read Patriotic Children as sort of about assimilation. But the Patriotic Children are holding an American flag that has a V, for victory woven into it. But I think to some extent, like the Surrealist, Hirshfield, he allows you to escape what is going on. I mean, there is no reference of the V in the flag, and that's it. There is no, I mean, there's also actually no reference to American culture, as such. But except for that one painting where they're holding an American flag, which we can't find for, I don't know where the hell it is in the world. But, so I think that in a way your second impulse, or your second question is important. I'm not sure that this moment is a total release from the war. I don't know, because I think there's also something about the power of what both art and perhaps sexuality, but what the power of play or the power of the imagination, and for the Surrealists it has a lot to do with dream and the unconscious, can do. I'm not saying they were thinking about the war at this moment, but I just wonder whether, and I would say, some last thing, first papers of Surrealism, I mean, it looks like it has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the war, but then when I'm just gonna go back, where the hell is it? Did I pet? Oh.
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting strategy in the midst of World War II. I don't know exactly how, and I don't want to be too literal, but to have it be chaotic and difficult, to have art not be served up to you on a platter, when the paper is about American citizenship, it's about exiles who need American citizenship. Anyway, I could go on, I don't want to belabor it, but yeah. But to be honest, I mean, I have to say, the last thing I'll say about this, I have not thought about the war. I mean, here I am working on an artist whose career is 1939, and his work never made me think about the war. Until I was asked, well, what about the war? By someone else. Yeah.
You spoke a lot about his technical skills as a tailor and an inventor, and,
Yeah.
And then also as a painter, obviously, with those textures he was painting.
Right.
But it almost sounded like when you were describing the way that he was characterized in even by the MoMA and the paper and by basically everyone, I feel like that wasn't Duchamp and some of his admirers, or I don't know if you would call them friends, but
Right.
admirers, that he was almost intentionally separated from his art in some ways, that they wanted to see his art but not really think about him. Whereas I feel like with a lot of, especially those surrealists, there's a big emphasis on the person. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering how much of that you feel is maybe even there, but also I guess what exactly that might have. Is it just because he's self-taught? Is it because his art is, I don't know, is it because he's Jewish? Is it because he's old? I just, some of
Yeah.
that just seems like he's intentionally disconnected from his works in ways that his art can
Yeah.
be consumed, but we don't talk about him and we don't think about him much.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he's not, Peggy Guggenheim and Sidney Janis are also Jewish, so, but it was complicated, the relation between the art world and Jewishness, but Peggy Guggenheim and Sidney Janis were fully assimilated. And I don't know this for a fact. Sidney Janis did interact with Hirshfield, but I believe it was in order to buy, I don't really believe they were friends. And I'm not sure that anyone in that circle had any particular desire to socialize with Morris Hirshfield, or that he had a desire to socialize with them. I will say that both his defenders and his detractors presented him as this guileless, primitivized, I mean, I'm using that word, but you know, old man from Brooklyn.
Oh,
Not
yes.
quite the way, not quite as far as Newsweek, but that was a story that worked for the avant-garde
Easy to
too.
sell in that way.
Yeah, and I think that is a way to frame, it's as though they're framing the paintings. Like, look what this, you know, this guy from the wilds of Brooklyn can do. It almost as though, I mean, that's why I was bringing up the Comte de Tremolon. I mean, like, almost as though we're automatic writing or automatic painting. Like it comes from somewhere. I don't know, sorry?
Like it's a miracle that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like, although it's a very difficult question for me, because he dies 3 years after that MoMA show, so no one really has to deal with him for that long. And I mean, yeah, I think that, as is often the case, the art world knows what to do with objects, but doesn't always know what to do with people.
Well, and it seems to me that it's very much a class thing,
Yes,
and he's not a social climber.
right,
So
although,
why would he want even to be socializing with these people?
Right.
I'm guessing that he's not a social climber, but you know, I mean, you can have your working class, whatever person who, oh, here's my big chance, and
Right. But even that is complicated because his company, Easy Walk, made over $1 million a year during the Great Depression. However, he then, when he got sick, had these two guys that he entrusted the company, and they ran it into the ground. So he had been wealthy. It's a much more complicated story than just this guy who's this, poor. I mean, he was never poor, but working
right,
class.
but I mean class and.
No, I didn't mean that you. I mean that the way in which the story was told at the time. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize not everyone wants to like hang out with Peggy Guggenheim.
Right. I mean, he made money, but he made the money. He
Yeah.
himself made the money.
Wait,
He
which
was-
money?
The Hirshfield's, his company. He built
Right.
a company literally with his hands and his brains,
Yeah,
right?
and then he
the
lost.
work of others.
Right. And then
But, and that's different maybe than the folks there on Fifth Avenue.
yeah, right. We're born, not Janice, but Guggenheim,
yeah,
born into
yeah.
great wealth. Yeah, so I think this is helpful because it's the idea of Hirshfield that people
Right.
were able to embrace, and the paintings, they love, but not the
And
actual,
he just
yeah.
did keep him in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
people.
I mean, I shouldn't say that. I feel like the art world operates on exclusion, there has to be someone excluded, or so that others can be included. That's not only the art world, but it feels to be quite almost obvious with the art world. Yes?
I think you later too, so I don't want to exhaust
Right.
you. But I want to hear sort of just as a professional curiosity how you're teaching Hirshfield, how he's fitting in your classroom or your syllabi. Because of the slides you've given us, we get a sense of how understanding Hirshfield helps us understand some dynamics about surrealism differently. But when we think about, why do we sort of marshal artists in our classroom, it's usually so that they're representing something about the historical past or the art historical past. And the kind of implicit claim with the outsider or the self-taught is that they can't represent larger movements, right? They're
Right.
kind of this outside thing.
Because they haven't studied or been
Right,
influenced.
so that they might become representational otherwise for dynamics of race or patent history or, immigration or regional differences. So I wonder about how to teach Edmondson. And I've thought too, what would a class of outsider artists look like? And would each be a totally different kind of social history or something, And I was curious how or whether Hirshfield's hitting your teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't taught Hirshfield at all. I delivered like a work in progress in in my method seminar to talk about sort of this. Well, anyway, this particular method that I'm trying to use, which I'm not exactly sure how to name or describe, like what to call Hirshfield. But what I feel that I am invested in is talking about things that mattered in their moment, but have been forgotten since. So that's like Paul Cadmus, for example, was, and I think that the forgotten is not an innocent forgetting. Like, I think what happened to folk art in terms of what happens almost in, I mean, Hirshfield's death almost like corresponds immediately to the decline. I mean, so William Edmondson was the first self-taught artist who had a one-man show at MoMA, one-person show. Morris Hirshfield was the second in 1943. There has not been another one since. There has not been a show. And you guys may know that in order to do the new MoMA, they actually destroyed the building next door, which was the Folk Art Museum, which I think of as metaphorical, but so that, I mean, but part of, I think the larger point that I'm making, it's not that what has been forgotten or suppressed can just be expressed or retrieved. I think we need to look at, well, what is at stake? What is it that needs to be repressed? So for example, art history can be a coherent discipline. I mean, you know, I think that Hirshfield does certain things to the category of art, as does Edmondson, that are not easy for, and I will just tell one other very quick anecdote, which is years ago, I was invited, so here's a very art worldly thing, I think. I was invited, first of all, to be invited to speak at an art fair. I mean, that did not happen. You know, they were not art fairs. So this one is in Mexico City. It's like the biggest art fair in Mexico, or in Latin America, I think. And an artist named Josiah McElhaney had decided that he wanted to do a new kind of format that he thought was, in his mind, based on the Société Anonyme, which is this avant-garde collective that was Marcel Duchamp and Catherine Troyer. Anyway, that was supposed to be an alternative in certain ways to museums in the 20s. But what he wanted to do, he would have many speakers, and then like 12. There would only be 12 listeners. That's all we would allow. And we would be drinking tequila and having chips and the whole time. And so the speaking would get more and more, you know, like wild. Oh wait, okay. So Lynn Cook is one of the speakers, and at the time, anyway, that's just an example of how wacky the art world is. But I think, but I did go, so I didn't complain about a ticket to Mexico City. Lynn Cook gets up, it's all works in progress, 5 or 10-minute presentations, and she starts talking about that she's interested in folk art, in doing a big folk art show. And I'm thinking, Lynn Cook is like the most scholarly, avant-garde, cutting edge, curator. Why the hell would she be doing a show on folk art? Why would she stoop that low, after she's done all of these really important artists? And that's what, I came to realize how my own modernist training had completely repressed self-taught art, just as much as MoMA had, and that I had inherited that. And it wasn't, the only reason I got interested in Morris Hirshfield was because Alfred Barr got in trouble for letting this show happen, and I wrote a book called What Was Contemporary Art that had a lot to do with MoMA, and how experimental MoMA was in the 30s. And there was supposed to be a section on Hirshfield, and I just never got to it. And then when I saw one of his paintings, Stage Beauties, which is now at the Metropolitan Museum, I had never seen one of his paintings in the flesh. And I've never written a book based on aesthetic. I'm always like, I'm a historian of art, I'm an art historian with a capital A, I write about history. So it's always been about a problematic or censorship or whatever. I saw this painting, I thought it was incredible, and I was like, this guy deserves a book. This guy deserves a show. So, I don't even know how I answer. I can't even remember how that started, but so I don't know how it's going to enter my teaching. And that is, I also think sometimes until you finish a project or see a show, you're not quite sure what it's going to bring. But I do think I am excited by your very much by your project, by some of the work Marcy Kwan, a colleague of mine, is doing. It seems to me that this is now permissible, not just within this subfield, but actually modernists, so-called modernists, are turning to this history and taking it seriously in a different way than I think was happening 10 years ago. Okay, maybe one more. Is there any last? What about the master of the two left feet or master of the two left feet? I have to make a decision.
And you have one more question.
I think no, I think you're right. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I like what you're saying about like the history of art and like, but also like the complicated Hirshfield movie disrupting.
Wait, I missed one word because of the sneeze. No,
Oh,
I'm not trying to blame you.
I was just saying, I like what you're saying about like the history of art, but how maybe Hirshfield kind of disrupts like
Yeah.
our field and stuff like that, and how artists like that can, I don't know, overfill the canon in some ways. And I know that it's kind of a complex balance, but like some of the work that I've been doing also has to do with like who's included and who's excluded, and like my focus was more on like what do they add to the larger story, and
Right.
are the missing pieces actually just as important as understanding everything else. And so I think that like you focusing on Hirshfield is like adds a whole nother part that no one else in like this show and like his other kind of contemporaries, I guess, in surrealism and some of the other modernists, like he adds a whole nother component that I think when you do take him out, you're missing a whole piece, not only of like his art or like the shows that he contributed to, but also like the whole story that you told us about how he was framed as like the way they framed him at MoMA, how he was like the second and then last self-taught one-man show at MoMA. So I think it's just like finding that balance of, I think this is doing a really great job of finding that balance between
Thank
what's
you.
included and not included and why.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that, part of my interest, I think the reason why I focused on or I often encourage my students to be historians of art as much as art historian, capital A, because I don't want them only looking at the capital A art they already know about, because that's not, I think art history is only part of the history of artistic production that actually existed. And obviously we can never get our hands around all of the history of art, but at the very least, we could look at what was at the time being discussed, being exhibited. I look at old issues of Art Forum. There's so many artists that, I have no idea who they were, but obviously someone in that moment did. And I think that can be exciting. But I will say, just as a final or whatever, not final word, but like today, like we have to leave. It did matter to me with this project. I think it's one reason it became a show. I sometimes get scared about this. I'm like, oh, are people going to make fun of me or make fun of the show? I really like the work. And it does, showing it, if you're in New York, next time you go to MoMA, 3 of them are on display, 3 really great ones. But I really like what he does on the surface, which is very surprising when you just look at the, from a distance. The subject matter is immediately clear, but it's not to everyone's taste. Like I tried to get MoMA to do that. I tried to get the Whitney. I call it my dog and pony show, which is funny because his dogs look like ponies. Anyway, I didn't. But they said no, and a lot of, it's not to everyone's taste, which is fine, but I think there's a little bit still of that condescension. Like why, what makes you think we would show this Brooklyn tailors and immigrant? And in the moment we're in right now, I am wanting to talk about immigrant creativity, because I think some of his work is, I don't know how to say it exactly, but I think it's about different kinds of outsiderness and insiderness. And a big part of the outsiderness, he said he always wanted to be an artist. That was not a possibility for him. The rag trade was, as for my grandparents. But I just feel like sometimes when people say no, or you can't study, that's not part of the discipline, or I don't know, or just maybe it's not even an academic thing. They're just like, oh, I'm not interested in that. I have a little tiny voice saying like, oh, they don't want to give that a chance. Like they just don't want that to exist on the radar. And it's not, so, sorry, I don't know how to finish this, but I think that what you said helps give you the confidence, so thank you, to, you know, believe that there'll be an audience that appreciates, you know,
And it
this
goes
work.
both ways, I think, so it's helpful for other people.
Oh, good, I hope so. Well, that's, yeah, I think that's my deepest, at this point in my life, that is what I want, is to be of some use. So anyway, thank you.